From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. Out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz will provide this week's cattle market commentary. He'll talk about the prospects for improvement in cattle prices after consecutive weeks of weakening prices. And Lee will look ahead to this Friday's USDA Cattle on Feed report. Then K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek will discuss the increasing cases of winter bovine dysentery in cow-calf herds, what causes it, and what response on the part of you producers is called for. Further ahead, Jeff Wickman has this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Aliah Mestrovich Seay. Has more on the 4-H Leadership Communications series. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and another Agriculture Today. Good to have you along with us. The cattle market's front and center, first of all today, with Lee Schulz offering the comments this time around. Lee is a livestock economist out of Iowa State University, and we have a grab bag of things we want to get into this time around, Lee. But let's start with the obvious, the Fed cattle trade this past week. On the heels of a couple of mildly down weeks, we saw more weakness in this trade.
The front end started the week that way. We did trade lower Monday, Tuesday when you look across the contracts. But I think there's some signs that those prices are starting to stabilize. If you look across the Fed cattle complex, we've seen Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, prices were up. Feeder cattle complex, similarly there. And so I think we're really hopefully transitioning to kind of the low point here as we've seen early on, and hopefully as box beef prices I think are certainly going to start to ramping up, that should excite this Fed cattle market a little bit and see some higher prices. It is important to note that we do see the smallest slaughter levels here in the spring. Indications are that we are rather current in our marketings. And so I think the situation is setting up for, I think, a little bit of appreciation in prices. Really, that mark is still 130 as potentially the high that we could see. Obviously, over the last couple of weeks, that's become less likely, but I think it's still sitting out there as the fundamentals could take us there as far as we have rather aggressive marketings. And, given the demand situation, if we do see, continued increase in exports, that could help push us forward here over the next couple of weeks.
So as you're alluding to, the futures markets were down earlier. They did rally fairly nicely the latter part of this past week. So can it be safely said that those trades have hit the floor, so to say, and will likely lead to this gradual improvement you're referring to?
I think that's the hope, certainly, right? But I think when you look at where we're at, I think we're in a market that we're getting a little bit more stabilization. And from the sense there that I think just really January, February are tough months for the beef market, for the cattle market, and moving into, the spring as we see the ramp up to more or increase in demand, that's certainly going to help. And I think what's important is we have to put the impacts these last couple of weeks into context, and really driven by the coronavirus, the new novel coronavirus. It's adding uncertainty to the markets. It's obviously pressuring the commodity markets, it's pressuring the stock markets. And so I think we're seeing a bit of market correction here, at least as we look at the last couple of days, to suggest maybe we're going to see some appreciation in those prices.
But Lee, especially noteworthy as we talk markets this week, feeder prices have been eroding. And this has the backgrounders' full attention right now.
It does. And when you look at this last fall, really as you were doing projections for preconditioning or backgrounding or even some stocker decisions of cattle producers, it really looked like a no-brainer. To add weight to those calves, you were looking at adding value as well. And so I think we did see that with some delayed weaning, and really the markets were just telling us this year to add weight to those calves. That really did help spread out placements here this last fall, and I think that helped the feeder cattle market. Now, as we've transitioned into 2020, and especially with the downturn in these markets, those backgrounding margins have certainly eroded if producers haven't marketed those calves, and really doesn't look much better here for the next couple of months. And so I think it kind of puts them in a precarious situation. They were expecting increased value. Markets were telling them to do that. If those prices weren't hedged, now those values are much lower, and that's going to contribute certainly to lower cow-calf producer and backgrounder incomes this year.
So for those who are backgrounding calves yet and had planned to do so for another month or two, with these margins narrowing ever so steadily, does that perhaps give them impetus to change their plans, maybe move those calves along in the marketplace before they were originally intending to?
I think it certainly makes marketing very important and really paying attention to the markets. Now, do I think we're likely to see some strength in prices as we get into the spring? I think we could see that, as seasonality is likely to bring up the fed cattle complex and along with it feeder cattle. But really, if you're looking at feeder cattle futures, they're pretty flatline until you get to that August contract. So that one suggests much appreciation as we currently look at the market. Luckily, though, we do have relatively low cost of gains, and performance has been really good this winter, as it's been a rather mild winter, especially compared to last year. So I think that's helping out the cost situation there. And so, overall, it certainly has impacted producers, but time will tell, if we do see it rally in that market and we can maybe offset some of the price decline we've seen.
Do you think, though, that this loss of enthusiasm over backgrounding calves may long-term impact the intentions for expanding the cattle herd on the cow-calf level and in fact, maybe lead to a little more thinking about contraction?
Potentially, and I say that because we have seen much larger beef cow slaughter here in the fourth quarter and even into 2020. I think some of that was expected as our cow herd is much larger. I think we had some aging cows in there. Replacement heifer numbers were actually larger than we expect. I think some of that was, replacing some of those older cows. But as we looked at that annual cattle inventory report, it did show those replacement heifer numbers were larger, but realizing that some of those are open replacement heifers. And so if they're open, those can be rather easily diverted to the feeder market. And so I think, it's going to be important to really look at these markets over the next couple of months, because producers, if that outlook dims a bit, I think they could change their expectations and change their replacement decisions somewhat, at the margin at least. And so, yes, I think it has potential to impact numbers. Now, how big, I think that's debatable. A lot of decisions have already been made. But certainly the more these markets see lower prices and see more volatility, that is straining producers and I think straining, some of their decisions that they have to make.
Well, we are around to time once again for another USDA Cattle on Feed report. The February edition will be issued this coming Friday, the 21st. As you look ahead to that, as the traders in general look ahead to that, what are the basic expectations? Expectations
look to be above year-ago levels across the board. Placements, I fully expect that number when we look at analyst pre-report expectations. It's going to be a pretty wide range on there. It's been a pretty wide range as we've looked over the last several months. I think it's going to be pretty large, maybe to the tune of 3 to 4% higher. Some initial indications are we had much higher auction receipts in January. Also, I think we're still on that tail of we're still looking at pretty good cattle feeding margins for the first half of 2020, and so I think that really did incentivize some placements into January. Again, we've been very aggressive in our marketing. That's going to put our marketing number slightly above year-ago levels. Collectively, I think we're roughly in that 2 to 3% on feed number for February 1. And
there may not be a whole lot of major reaction to those numbers if they come in as expected. This is pretty status quo, isn't it?
I think it is. And like you said, unless we see some pretty big surprises, what I'm seeing these markets really react to is kind of things outside the cattle market, right? And I think that's a little bit to be expected as we're kind of in this slow time for beef demand. We haven't really seen much ramp up yet. The supply situation, we are at smaller slaughter levels just seasonally. And so this is a time that the markets are going to probably react and overreact to factors outside the market, and we're going to see some corrections in those because of that overreaction, I think.
All right. In closing, though, coming off of this past trading week and looking ahead to the trading week before us, a tone may have been set for some recovery or at least improvement in the market. Do you think we'll see that follow through in this coming week?
Friday really did, we've seen rather strong prices on the futures board, especially in feeder cattle. And I think that really does at least help us set some momentum going into this week. 3 days, consecutive days of day-over-day increases in those prices. Friday rather strong. Fundamentals at least, suggesting we can hold these levels or increase, I think, certainly sets us up well for this coming week.
It would be welcome news, and as always, Lee, many thanks for your input, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Thank you.
Out of Iowa State University, livestock economist Lee Schulz, offering this week's cattle market commentary here on Agriculture Today. In a moment, our regular stint on bovine health management and the word on another affliction that you cattle producers need to be aware of from our guest out of the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Kansas State University. Next, here on the K-State Radio Network. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. We're back now on This Agriculture Today, and once more an occasion to visit with the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit at K-State's Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, welcoming back Gregg Hanzlicek to talk about another aspect of bovine health management. He's with us each month right here. And you bring to our attention this time, Gregg, something that doesn't always get a lot of fanfare, but it's out there now, you say, and you'd like cattle producers to be aware of it. It's called winter bovine dysentery, and there are important caveats that we need to share about this, you say.
Well, absolutely. And like you said, it's been around in the dairy side for a long time. We do see it in feedlot and cow-calf operations today. It is caused by bovine coronavirus, so that's the thing we need to stress. It is not the human coronavirus that's in the news. It's a specific organism that's in bovine only.
It has nothing to do with the coronavirus that's out there and wreaking havoc in human health in Asia and elsewhere, and you can't stress that enough, right?
Absolutely. It is totally different. It has nothing to do with the human health in any stretch of the imagination.
So please keep that in context as we talk about this condition. What is it exactly? What does it do?
Well, we've talked about coronavirus, and most producers know that it is a baby calf scour causing organism, so they're aware of that. We're now thinking that coronavirus is also associated with a mild respiratory disease. And this isn't new, but this coronavirus syndrome actually causes diarrhea in adult cows and bulls. and typically 2 years of age up to 6 years of age.
And there have been such cases turn up recently, you say?
We've had 3 cases come through the diagnostic lab just in the last few months, probably since October anyway, which is, like I said, it's a dairy. We talk a lot about it on the dairy side, but 3 cow-calf operations since October is a little strange to us, so we thought we'd better talk about it.
So what does this affliction do to breeding animals out there?
Well, the clinical sign is that our cows are fine today, and then we walk out there, and within a couple days, up to 100% of them, 50, 60, but up to 100% have a profuse, blackish, greenish diarrhea. Some of these animals actually aren't really passing any fecal material. They're just passing frank blood clots. So it can be very disturbing if you haven't been around it before.
And you say it comes on suddenly. This isn't something that necessarily builds up over time.
It's very sudden, and the incubation period, according to researchers, is like 4 to 8 days, but typically it just goes through it starts. The whole herd's almost involved immediately, or at least 50, 60%, and then everybody in the whole pen or the whole herd has actually had this diarrhea over a couple days.
So it spreads rapidly throughout the herd very quickly.
It does, and we think that it's a fecal-oral type of transmission, but we also know that it can be spread through aerosols, through breathing, which makes sense if we look at how fast it actually spreads through the herd, that if infected animals are breathing on each other, we can infect them that way.
So has animal behavior changed with this infection, with this dysentery?
It's pretty mild. I mean, they do have a diarrhea. They'll go off feed a little bit. When people watching the bunks or watching them at their feed say, yeah, their intakes go down a little bit. We assume that a beef cow that's milking and production probably goes down. There might be a little mild nasal discharge, clear nasal discharge, but the classical sign of this is that a very high percentage of the animals have diarrhea, but the number of animals that succumb to the disease or die is very, very, very low.
But it can, because they become somewhat sluggish, impede performance for a short time anyway?
Absolutely, because it's an intestinal disease, and so, again, their feed intakes are down. They're probably not absorbing the nutrients the way they should, so whether we can recognize it or not, either average daily gain or feed efficiency or milk production, those things are all probably going to decrease during this time.
Well, Greg, you say that there are certain risk factors, as you call them, that can promote this dysentery.
Yeah, the people that have looked at it, looked at herds that break out with it, say there's certain risk factors, and one of them is if a herd has had coronavirus as this adult syndrome before. Maybe not every year, but periodically they're going to have the issue again. We don't understand that. Age, again, this is 2 years of age and older, typically 2 to 3. We do think that temperature, or some researchers think that a temperature change, a sudden decrease in temperature can bring it on. And this disease we see a lot more in the northern part of the United States than we see anywhere else because of the cold temperatures. Confinement. Animals that are in a confinement situation, which these 3 herds that we've dealt with since October were all confined herds, which makes sense that they're spreading it to each other. Poor ventilation. Herds that are BVD positive, which is interesting, have been shown to be at a higher risk for coronavirus. BVD is an immunosuppressive virus, so it makes sense that if we have BVD, our immune systems aren't functioning very well. And then the other risk factor is we see it more in herds that use their loader to not only load feed, but they use the same bucket without cleaning it out to push manure. So we've got manure contaminating the feed, and then we feed our cattle.
So sanitation would be part of the answer here, perhaps. But are there any effective treatments for this condition then?
There aren't. And like all our viruses in bovine medicine, we do not have any antivirals. The good thing is it's a mild disease, and so in time these animals, within a couple weeks, basically we think that these animals have fully recovered.
So it's self-limiting, you say?
It is self-limiting, and the thing that we do stress is when your herd or if your group of animals is going through it, that there's plenty of fresh water available because they're going to be dehydrated. Fresh feed. We know their intakes are going to go down, but we want to make sure that we're offering them something that they want to eat that's very palatable and very fresh.
Not only from the feed intake side of it, but for the breeding performance side of the matter, this condition won't affect that negatively at all either?
No, we don't think it's so short-lived, and it's such a mild disease that we just think it's a short-term feed intake type of performance issue is what it's causing.
You do point out as well, Greg, that one does need to make a distinction between this condition, the dysentery, and perhaps other afflictions in cattle. Be sure of what you're up against here.
Absolutely. Just because you walk out there and you see a bunch of adults with diarrhea, maybe some blood, don't think just this coronavirus or winter dysentery. There's other things like salmonella. Coccidia, a little bit old animals for that, but we can see coccidia outbreak in older animals. And then occasionally, rarely, but it can happen, is BVD. So strongly recommend that if this happens, to call the veterinarian and probably should do some diagnostics to make sure where we're at or what organism we're dealing with.
And that's where the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at K-State can step in and lend assistance in that identification. About prevention, any way of accomplishing that?
Well, it'd be nice if we could prevent the temperature swings like we had yesterday. We can't do that. Confinement, I mean, some herds, we don't have the opportunity or the luxury to keep our animals from being in close proximity to each other. There's lots of diarrhea, neonatal diarrhea coronaviruses on the market, but there's actually at least a couple that are labeled for adult coronavirus prevention. One's an oral and one's an intranasal. And they've been shown to be very effective to prevent these diseases. So that's something producers should talk to their veterinarian about if they've had this issue in the past. I wouldn't just blanketly start vaccinating our adults for this to prevent it. Because, again, it is a mild disease. Our mortality is going to be very, very low. So mass medication isn't necessarily the answer here. Not in this disease. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So it will take care of itself eventually with very few problems, hopefully, but it's alarming to see. That really is the crux of this and why you want producers to be familiar with what it truly is about.
It absolutely is. If you can imagine walking out where your animals are all normal yesterday, the manure is normal, feed intakes were normal, and then you walk out there a day or two later, and a very large percentage of them all have a severe diarrhea. And really the frightening thing, if you see it with the big blood clots that you'll see sometimes that they're passing, that's pretty disturbing even for a veterinarian.
Know what it's about. Be working with your practitioner to identify it. It's called bovine winter dysentery. Again, related to a coronavirus. You opened up with it. We want to leave with it. One more time reminding, this is not the same pathogen that is causing such concern worldwide in the human health field.
Absolutely. This virus has been in the bovine herds for a long time. It has absolutely, positively nothing to do with any coronavirus, basically in any other species, but especially in humans.
Right. Producers, be watching for it, and it's not, again, restricted to younger calves. It can be found in older breeding stock as well. As Greg has noted, they've discovered in recent cases that were delivered to the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, winter bovine dysentery. Work with your veterinarian, of course. As always, Greg, we appreciate the heads up. Many thanks to you. Gregg Hanzlicek over from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at Kansas State University on this condition, and he's along with us regularly to talk about what's happening in the field of bovine health management on Agriculture Today. Now we'll break away for a few moments. When we come back, then, we'll pass along today's agricultural news headlines for you. Also, this week's edition of Tree Tales, K-State Forester Bob Atchison awaiting with that. And Jeff Wickman is standing by as well with this week's 4-H segment. All of that is yet to come here on the K-State Radio Network. Please stay with us.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Well, for a goodly number of you cow-calf producers, the spring beef calving season has commenced. Hopefully all has gone relatively well for you. But in those instances that the cow or heifer is struggling to calve routinely, the question always arises, when should you, the producer, intervene with assistance? That was brought up regularly at the series of K-State beef calving schools around the state recently. And here's what K-State beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff has to share on that.
I'll kind of throw out my generalized rules of thumb. And it all starts with active calving. Once they start to go into active calving, they're pushing with their abdomen, the water bag comes out and breaks. Okay, when that water bag breaks, that's the first start of active calving. Okay, and I call it a rule of an hour. After that water bag breaks, if they're not making adequate progress within an hour, it's time to intervene. Okay, that's a good generalized rule of thumb that if they're in active calving, no progress, we're not seeing them progress through. And by progress, I mean the calf is, the different parts of the animal, both the head, the front legs are coming through the birth canal. She's straining. She's not getting stressed. Everything is going well. That's how it should progress. But if it's been an hour and there's no progress, time to intervene, time to figure out what's going on. My second rule of thumb is how long do I try to intervene? And that's where I recommend to producers to try to figure out what is causing the problem. And usually it's the calf isn't coming through the birth canal quite right. And so I do try to have producers try to diagnose what the problem is, whether there's a leg back, the head didn't come into the birth canal. They could be breech, okay? They could be backwards and the legs aren't coming through. Try to diagnose what the problem is. After you've hopefully been able to diagnose what the situation is, now try to intervene, try to manipulate the calf to come out like it should. This is my next rule of thumb is I give you about a half hour. A half hour for a couple of different reasons, but only try to intervene for a half hour. If you've intervened for a half hour and you are no longer making progress, it's time to call for help. Contact your local veterinarian. That's the best mode to be able to hopefully get a live calf on the ground. Half hour, I don't know about everybody out there, listening, but after a half hour of trying to manipulate a calf, I'm worn out. So no longer are we, potentially going to be making any progress. Number two, the longer we stay in there trying to manipulate, we cause inflammation. We can actually cause a little bit of swelling on the inside of the birth canal. So we don't want to do that, especially if it's a larger calf. And number three, our ultimate goal is to get a live calf on the ground. Those critical situations, time is of the essence. We want to make sure that we get the correct intervention as soon as possible. And that may lead to a C-section or something else that your veterinarian recommends.
Point, though, is don't hesitate to seek that assistance when it's obvious that you need it. And even if you even suspect that you need it, don't wait any longer. Do bring your veterinarian in.
It really is. And for a lot of locations through Kansas, the veterinarian may not be 5 minutes away. They may be an hour away. They may be on another call. Mm-hmm. But at least if you communicate with them that you're having an issue, you're trying to solve it, but it's not going well, at least it gets it on their radar that they can get to your operation as soon as possible.
K-State beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff on calving intervention. And just to remind, A.J. will be in essence putting on another of those calving schools as part of the 107th Cattlemen's Day at K-State. Again, it's set for Friday, March the 6th. The event opens with the trade show, the educational exhibits, and the morning program, all of that at Weber Hall and Arena. AJ's presentation will be that afternoon at the Purebred Beef Unit. And there's much, much more on that Cattlemen's Day program. Be sure to reserve your spot. Go to ksubeef.org for more information on registration or call 785-532-1267, 785-532-1267. Cattlemen's Day 2020 at K-State, Friday, March the 6th. Now, out of the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State, this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Bob Atchison. Bob?
Our first legislative hearing on climate change was recently held at our Kansas State Capitol and hosted by the Climate Energy Project. The hearing was held in conjunction with their Environmental Advocacy and Education Day and included climate experts, legislators from both parties, and a variety of advocates. The Kansas Forest Service was one of the many exhibitors at the event promoting forest and agroforestry management and tree planting, which is getting quite a bit of attention these days. In the State of the Union address, President Trump announced that the United States would join a global effort to plant 1 trillion trees. In response, House Republicans are proposing a bill with a goal of planting 3.3 billion trees each year for the next 30 years, an increase of 800 million trees per year. Some estimates suggest that we are currently planting around 2.5 billion annually. Though tree planting and protecting forests is an important way to sequester and store carbon, climate experts rightly point out that it is only one of a host of activities needed to address the changing climate and our environmental issues. USDA Forest Service scientists published research in 2018 that suggests that the United States lost 36 million trees in our towns and cities between 2009 and 2014, largely due to urban sprawl. That's about 175,000 acres per year. Estimates for Kansas was 1,450 acre loss annually, while impervious surfaces such as parking lots and roads increased by 2,670 acres each year. As we attempt to address climate change, it will be critical to develop policy that protects existing forest land and simultaneously promotes tree planting. Tree planting is a simple act that anyone can participate in, whether it is in our cities or on our farms or ranches. The Kansas Forest Service provides low-cost seedlings and professional foresters who can assist with planning tree planting projects. Why not give us a call at 785-532-3300 or check us out on the web at www.kansasforest.org. This is Bob Atchison with the Kansas Forest Service, encouraging you to consider the simple and hopeful act of tree planting. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Bob, as always. After this final break, Jeff Wickman takes the helm as he has this week's 4-H segment for you. Next on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H continues to facilitate community conversations by training 4-H youth, adult volunteers, and extension agents to teach others about ways to approach difficult issues and have tough conversations in working toward creating positive public discussion. The program provides a way for youth of diverse views and experiences to seek a shared understanding of the problem and to search for common ground for action. Kansas 4-H Culture and Communication Skills Specialist Aliah Mestrovich Seay says that the principles of community conversations were used during Citizenship in Action, which wraps up today at the state capitol in Topeka. Aliah, we're going to focus on intercultural conflict styles today, and you were telling me that this is part of the Leadership Communication Series.
Yes. So one important part of this series is called Communication or Conversation Boot Camp. And within that workshop, which is about a 4-hour workshop, youth, adult volunteers, and extension agents learn about different conflict styles that exist around the globe and also within the United States.
So what do you mean when we say that there are different conflict styles?
Well, based on our upbringing, what we value, what our belief system is, we have different ways of tackling conflict. And sometimes we think that our way is the best way.
And we're learning that we need to kind of bridge that gap, or at least learn how to understand someone else's position?
Absolutely. So a big part of youth learning to be facilitators of community conversations is learning the fundamentals of just communication skills and interpersonal skills. So one thing that we really want, a learning outcome that we want for youth to have when they finish Conversation Boot Camp, is to just be more open, accepting, and curious of how different people that have different backgrounds than them may approach conflict, which is probably going to be differently.
So how do you go about tackling this then? What do you do, some exercises? Do you kind of run through some hypotheticals? How does this all work?
Well, we do a variety of things. We have them take the intercultural conflict style inventory that actually shows 4 different ways that we approach conflict globally. We also have them do a series of skits and have them really act out how to interact with people that are coming from different conflict styles. Because some people, like me, I'm very direct in a conflict. And so people know, that I say what I mean and I mean what I say. But other people might be more comfortable being indirect or telling a story or having an intermediary discuss the conflict with another person. So there's just so many ways to approach this that we want youth to know that their way isn't the right way. It's just one way to approach conflict.
Does that mean then that they learn to read others and they also maybe learn how to adjust their approach to meet that other person's understanding?
That's exactly right. The ultimate goal is for youth to be able to learn how to shift their behavior and adapt in a multicultural international society where if they understand the conflict style of the person that they are working with or studying with or volunteering with, that they're actually going to have a better product at the end if they can communicate better, especially during a conflict.
This is also important then for 4-Hers to learn not only just for everyday activities within their own club, but also as they maybe move into the college scene.
Yes, we're really hoping that this is a way to approach life skill development at any stage the 4-Her is in. And youth and adults are learning alongside each other. I've had great feedback from adult volunteers and extension agents that have said, I'd never even thought about this before, but it really makes sense now, and I'm going to use this. So it seems to be helping our 4-H community in general.
And this is all part then of the Community Conversations and the Community Conversations Boot Camp?
Well, that's the ultimate goal, that first youth, adult volunteers, and extension agents go through Conversation Boot Camp and learn the fundamental communication skills necessary to then facilitate community conversations. So it's part of a 3-workshop series that we've been offering across the state.
Are we starting to see that there is more diversity across Kansas? I know a lot of times people don't think of us as being a diverse state, but there is diversity.
I love that question because I actually went and I co-facilitated in Dodge City during the Southwest Youth Leadership Forum in January, and there was more diversity in that room of 80 people than in any conversation boot camp I have ever done, and it was specifically in regards to conflict styles. There was a wide array of conflict styles within that room and such a diversity, even though a lot of the people there come from different backgrounds and may look similar.
Does it matter then as you go through this kind of conflict resolution and looking at the conflict styles, does it matter who is in attendance at these, or is it the same no matter who's there?
We like to cater to whatever group that we are providing the workshop to, but we do typically go through similar programmatic offerings that has, empathy as a leadership skill, working through tough conversations, and also communication style differences, and finally conflict styles as a way to jumpstart being a community conversation facilitator in the future.
So you're also looking at adult facilitators as well as youth facilitators?
Yes, we are. So, for example, last weekend we had Citizenship in Action, and for the first time ever, we had adult facilitators and youth facilitators leading deliberative forums and community conversations alongside each other with adult and youth groups. So we're all learning civility and civic discourse together with an aim to really move forward together as a state.
And you have more of these planned as well throughout the year?
We do. So we are tentatively scheduled out until the fall. We have other local units really wanting to be part of this series and seeing the value in it, and we're excited to continue to offer this program.
This program sounds like it's of value to everyone within 4-H, but maybe is there someone in particular who might want to get down this path?
I think anybody that is just wanting to be open to trying new things, taking risk, and further developing their ability to exercise leadership and communication, which is basically anybody, right? Myself included, that this is an open opportunity for new audiences, for people that want to learn more about 4-H and what we do, to really get engaged and do something purposeful at a time when we need to be focusing more on how we're treating each other and how we're interacting in our society.
That's Kansas 4-H Culture and Communication Skills Specialist Aliah Mestrovich Seay. To learn more about the Personal Development Project area of 4-H, which includes citizenship, communications, and leadership, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for the Monday edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.